And taking up the hot topic of the week, we saw all the way in the Washington, D.C., how the riots were taken place subsequent to the Twitter updates by the President, Donald Trump. And they walked up right into the Capitol and interrupted the Congress. I mean, let's start off from the Georgia's, the election that took place.
Yes, so I think this came in the culmination of the Georgia runoffs and the results being announced. Now, because as we know that 2 senators from Georgia were picked from the Democrat side. So in the states, the 2 main parties are Democrats and Republicans, and there are 3 branches of government that actually do make the legislation and, of course, the law making laws. So these are the things that were up in play. Now, of course, talking about Georgia, there were 2 runoffs, like I said. This was between Jon Ossoff and David Perdue. That was one of the runoffs. And the second one was between Raphael Warnock and Kelly Loeffler. So these were the 2. And, of course, the winners were from Democrats. We saw Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock winning for the Democrats. Now, this was a particularly interesting and important election because the Senate is 100 people. So there are 100 senators in the United States. These 100 were divided as 52 and 48 before the runoff. Now, the incumbents were from Republican side, and this was very important because the Democrats control both the House of Representatives, and the presidency, which happened in November. So this particular election had a lot riding on it because this came after the November 3rd elections. November, we saw that elections happening, and of course, we saw that Trump was very much argument about the election results.
He was not accepting the defeat.
Yes.
He was very reluctant to accept it.
Yes, so this whole thing started with that. The whole process, because of COVID, the election process was completely different. We saw that going into the elections, Democrats were encouraged to vote from home. Trump being somewhat of a denier of the COVID effects. Now, he's not a COVID denier, but he was reluctant to wear a mask. He was reluctant to tell people to social distance or close their businesses and operate in the new normal. We saw that affect their chances of the election as well. So a lot of Republicans tended to go to the voting booth and vote. Now, how the votes were counted in a lot of provinces, even though the mail-in ballots came in first, they counted the ones that were done on the election day. So this affected the election results. So we saw that Republicans favoring in some states earlier on until the mail-in ballots were counted, and we saw that those leads disappearing and Democrats overtaking them in those states. So in US elections aren't a popular vote. So in Sri Lanka, you see that whoever gets the highest number of election votes win. This is not the case in the United States. Particularly in the last election, we can say that the election before the last, I should be more obvious. In 2016, Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton actually got the most of the popular votes, but she didn't have the electoral votes. The electoral votes are towards each state. There are 52 states, and those 50 states have different types of votes actually assigned for them. So you can see from actually states like California and New York getting a bunch of them, and you can see smaller states, the states that aren't populous, getting a lower number of them. So there are 538 electoral votes up for grabs. So there are instances where it can be 269 to 269. 270 is needed to win. If 269 to 269 happens, the electors go for the Republicans, the representatives and the Senate. So representatives choose the president and the senators will choose the vice president. So that's what happens in a normal election cycle. Otherwise, of course, normally if 270 is taken, that party becomes the winner. And after the election results are somewhat dwindled, what happens normally is the loser actually makes a concession speech, and then the winner takes the stage and makes a winner inaugural speech, actually a speech thanking the voters and announcing his win. There is an inauguration period. The transition of power happens over several months. It happens usually January 20th, 21st, depending on sometimes the dates, but this year it will happen on the January 20th is when the inauguration is supposed to take place. So this is the background of the election. This was what happened. What happened actually was a little bit different. I think all of us know Donald Trump refused to concede the election. He made widespread accusations of voter fraud.
He used the theme to say the election was stolen.
Yes, he said the election was stolen from him. He actually said that there were widespread voter fraud. He said that dead people were voting. There were machines that were irregular and machines had malfunctions. Now, all these stories that were widespread and populated by, of course, Trumpeteers, as they said, who are supporting Trump's, were actually proven to be false. There were numerous lawsuits being brought, even in the Supreme Court, which is the United States highest court, which decides on matters at a final level, which is controlled by Republican-leaning judges. Actually said unanimously, yes, these stories aren't true at all. So they had a lot of cases thrown out. They had some cases that went to trial and the judges threw them out. They never actually really won anything of substance. So this really affected the Trump campaign. They were not actually negotiating with the Biden camp to actually have a smooth transfer of powers. This really affected during this particular pandemic where a lot of people are dying. Now, of course, looking at the United States COVID numbers, which are the worst, there are 22 million people who are affected. There are deaths are closing up to 370,000 mark. So this is something that is of note this year. So when you got all of these brewing, now of course Trump refused to actually say, hey, this election happened. He came close sometimes saying, all right, there might be a party in power, but everything else, he was adamant that he won the election and he was going to get the seat again, another term. Now, of course, this actually riled up his supporters who went into a frenzy, and they are the ones that actually stormed the Capitol. So that was what that was. And of course, during this particular time, we can't ignore that COVID was happening. Now, of course, the government had provided relief measures to the populace at the earliest onset of COVID. But when COVID progressed more and more, we saw that the government was not taking any action.
Action about it.
Yes. And even in the Supreme Court, and now there was a Supreme Court judge who actually passed away called Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was actually replaced by Amy Coney Barrett, and that actual vote took place in the Congress, but they didn't vote on the COVID relief measure. That was before the election that took place as well. So after those things happened, people were getting frustrated. Now the election happened, and of course now when the relief bill was passed, it was for $600. Now Trump said, hey, let's increase this up to $2,000. Up to $2,000 is what he said. With the Republican-controlled Senate, which also has to pass the bill, so a bill has to be passed by the House, the Senate, and it has to be signed into law by the President. So that is how things happen in the states. So we went and saw that in the USA this particular time, they didn't approve it. The Republican-controlled Senate, Trump's side, actually said, no, we are not going to pass it. This affected the Georgia runoff as well. So people were really frustrated, but Trumpeteers or the Trump supporters were really riled up again by saying, hey, this is also voter fraud. This is also people trying to take our country back. Myths perpetuated. There were people who are saying, hey, these are things the government is used to spy on us. Vaccines are real. There are a lot of misinformation that was fed to this populace, and they got riled up and they attacked the Capitol. In the Capitol attack, we saw 5 people actually passing away. 1 Capitol police officer, of course, passed away as well. This was pretty recently. And one of the attackers you saw trying to get into the House chambers, which actually house the lawmakers, the upper house and the lower house, which is
it's a federal building.
It's a federal building.
Just trespassing the premises itself would be an offense to be jailed for up to 10 years, they say. Yeah. So in this context, they were still going ahead with it, and Joe Biden calls them thugs or domestic terrorists at the moment.
Yeah, I think that is the word thrown about. Domestic terrorism is something Pretty serious.
So all these happened through
Yeah.
social media, if we saw.
Yes.
We saw how Twitter has reacted to Trump's continuous,
Yeah.
violence probing messages, which,
yeah,
continued to drive
So,
the forces.
This is the real thing, like Trump alleged voter fraud from the onset itself. But Twitter and social media platforms took the initiative to say, have warnings saying, hey, these claims of voter fraud are unfounded and not true, as widely reported. So every one of Trump's tweets about those things had that tag attached on by the Twitter company, and of course Facebook also took these steps. But towards the end of this, when the riots happened, I think all those social media companies actually took notice, saying, hey, this is something that is pretty serious. So Facebook actually at first initiated a permanent ban on indefinite ban on him. Twitter also suspended him for a while, and he said, okay, we'll let you tweet if you abide by the rules and tell people what they need to know, because he is also in a position of very much power. He has the POTUS account still, but his own account called Real Donald Trump, they actually allowed him for a second. Then after that, when he again tried to perpetuate these myths, he was taken off the platform and banned permanently. So these are some things that private firms have actually taken actual steps, have taken to do this. This Capitol riots actually came on the onset of certifying the electoral results. Now Electoral College actually goes and actually says, hey, this is a vote. It's an actual vote that takes place. So this has to be certified by the United States State of Congress, Upper House and the Lower House. So they actually certified it. There were some senators who actually said no.
Opposed
there were
it.
6
Still,
people.
they were
Actually on
couple
the
of
Trump side,
Republicans.
not the voters' side. So that was something that the previous majority leader Mitch McConnell tried to prevent, but he actually did cause the relief bill to be shut down. So there was that and that. So there are a lot of things that were up in the air, and people got riled up. And how much they got riled up is pretty evident by the amount of firepower they bought in. There were people who bought in assault rifle guns with hundreds of ammunition. There was a guy who bought on a pickup truck with 11 bombs, and there was 5 bombs the day before. Prior
so
to
these can be like, again, we have to think about the next 14 days. Now they're worried about the next 14 days, how Trump will react until the inauguration, and they are going up to the extent of saying that, the president is not fit to perform his duties as the president. So moving on from US to UK, and about the lockdown we heard about in the UK since the holiday season. We saw how Boris Johnson was making space for the families to, spend their holiday season with the family, and suddenly, just few days ahead of Christmas, they had to just, cancel all their plans and go into a strict lockdown. And this is in relation to the new strain, the mutant variant that was coming in the COVID virus. So let's just go back to December and then come towards...
So, of course, like you said, second string. Now, viruses in their own are things that mutate and change. So this is something that we have to realize. Even a common virus, it will mutate and change. That's what viruses do. Now, of course, when it's transmitted to a different person, it will change a little bit, and most of the times, these new strains die out. Now, if there's a perfect storm of events where the environment, the person's makeup of, the health, and of course the population density and all those factors come together, a new strain can develop. And of course, that can affect. Now, that's what we saw in what's happening in the UK, what happened actually. And this caused widespread panic, because now UK, I think there were a lot of people who wore masks and all that stuff, but they were not social distancing. They gathered a lot in public populous places. They had, bars, pubs, restaurants, family gatherings. These were ongoing. And the administration itself was reluctant to say, hey, don't do that. And this was something of note for a lot of people there. Boris Johnson actually at first said, all right, like you said, you can have a normal Christmas, you can have normal holidays, just don't go out too much. But as the second strain started to develop and the virus cases started shooting up, they had to say, all right, stay back home. This might not be the ideal situation. So a lot of people, if at the onset, if they had said, all right, you can go out, I think they would have been fine. But a little bit of frustrations came out. Of course, this is during a time of great contention to UK as well. They're going to undergo Brexit. So these things were all looming in the horizon when UK went to a lockdown. Now, when you actually look at the other countries in the bloc, you see that a lot of countries have different types of, in Greece, everybody has to text to go out. Italy is in a national lockdown. This is during the holiday season. Spain actually had limited every gathering to 10 people. So there were a lot of people who were actually responding to the ongoing crisis at hand. And this second strain added to that. So everybody else who's actually going through a hard time because of the normal COVID actually got scared and wasn't sure if the vaccines could work and all that stuff. So we'll actually talk about the
vaccines as well, yes.
So in the vaccines case, so everybody wasn't sure. Now, of course, a lot of people know that second strain also responds to the virus. But at the onset, when they heard about the second strain, we had to undergo a pandemic. People got really scared, and they imposed travel restrictions across the bloc.
So if you go in detail of the vaccines, let's just talk about how even the religious leaders went to the extent of making a point during Christmas time that it should be available for the humans in general. So let's just touch upon that as well.
Yeah, the human leaders, I think, are all the a lot of religious leaders, I think, actually backed science this time around. Now, because religious leaders are people of faith, but this time around, I think a lot of them came into the field of science and said, hey, let's actually make it right. Let's survive, get through this. And of course, we saw world leaders actually coming to the cause. We actually talked a lot about the US at the onset, but even the newly elected president, Joe Biden, actually went himself and got the vaccine actually administered to him. And we see this happening across the bloc. We see a lot of world leaders, a lot of pioneers coming and saying, hey, we're getting the vaccine, it's safe. So a lot of the times you can be assured that something is safe by the people who are actually up to take it there. Now, if you talk about the vaccine itself, there are two popular ones that have been proven safe, and a lot of the FDAs have proved. So the FDA is the Food and Drug Administration in USA. So they have extensive processes of wetting the viruses. Actually, UK also has a program called MHRA, which is the body that they use to wet the virus vaccines of sorts. So those two approved two vaccines, one from a group called Moderna, the other from Pfizer-BioNTech. So those two vaccines have been shown effective to respond to this particular virus. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the vaccines of Moderna has an efficacy rate of 94.1, and Pfizer-BioNTech has, I think, efficacy rate of 95%. So those are the two particular aspects of these two vaccines, which are pretty much identical. So Moderna vaccine, I think you can keep it at a refrigerator. So -4 Fahrenheit is what the Moderna vaccine can be kept at. And of course, the Pfizer vaccine is a little bit harder. It has to be kept at -94 Fahrenheit. So there are differences, subtle differences, and of course, after those have been taken, they have to be administered. The R&D cost and all that stuff, things have to be factored in. So the viruses were getting out of the price range of normal humans. That's why I think a lot of world leaders.
WHO is going to the extent of allowing it to be donated by the wealthy countries.
Yeah, we see, and of course,
it
private
might not be available because subsequently it might increase in price. So if we move back to UK, then this is in relation to the Brexit. We can relate it towards with the lockdown as well. So Boris Johnson is wanting to be more powerful and more influential, and that's his intention in executing the Brexit. And the clock was ticking. In December we were waiting, and now they are through. So what is ahead for Britain, and what can we expect? So
Britain also, now this is very trying for Britain, going through a second strain, undergoing heavy lockdown, and they are coming down on the 11-month transition period of the Brexit deal. Now, Brexit, of course, started way back in 2016 with the referendum saying the UK want to secede from the EU bloc and have its own set of rules, trades and NHS. They wanted to keep a lot of their funds in, and they didn't want to send any money out. So these were the things that they focused on to actually bring about Brexit. Now, of course, there are other things to consider as well. Trade, there are, of course, people who are traveling back and forth. Those things were, of course, affected by Brexit. Now, June 2016...
The immigration and the travelling,
so,
even the service sectors, they say about the data and financial services can be affected in this long process.
Definitely. And, of course, June 2016 referendum happened. The moment it happened, David Cameron, who was against Brexit, stepped down. And Theresa May came into power. And, of course, during March of 2017, after their internal matters were actually subsided, she announced to the EU, all right, we're going to secede. And the actual plan was for 2019, March 29th. They were going to go out, but we saw Theresa May actually struggling to get a deal from the EU, a favorable deal, because everything that has to be considered, like we said, the trade, the immigration, and of course, a lot of unseen things. A lot of people view the European bloc as one thing. So you see in Sri Lanka, when we sometimes go into international negotiations, we are considered a part of the Indian subcontinent rather than the country itself, because Indian subcontinent is a bigger populace, bigger marketplace, so they tend to extend those rules out. But because we are our own sovereign country, they have to negotiate on with us as well, which has given us a benefit. So that's what the UK wanted, but they didn't. They have a bigger bargaining power as the EU bloc. So these things actually did go out. So they wanted some of those bargaining power to secede the UK. So this is what Theresa May struggled with. That's why Boris Johnson came. Theresa May had to resign, and of course Boris Johnson came into power. He was going forward with Brexit, and in December of 2019 they had another election, and when Boris Johnson won, I think that was people saying, all right, Brexit has to happen. We see in the UK and the European bloc a lot of people being tired of their Brexit rather than its ramifications. They're just tired of hearing about it because it's been 5 years right now. And after everything came to a pass, I think now we saw on the 31st of December 2020, in 300 hours GMT, that's when the officially Brexit came into effect.
Struck 11.
Yeah, and so freedom to live and work between UK and EU came to an end. We saw visas for more than 90-day stay was required during a 180-day period. If you want to come for 90 days, you had to get a visa. And you saw trade policies negotiating on own. So a lot of things are happening right now. I think we'll see what really happens, because you can't say what happens in the Brexit deal.
Okay, so we've come towards the end of the discussion for today, and as always, we'll be here on the 2nd and the 4th of the month on Sunday at 9:30 p.m. on Channel I. We invite you to join us on the next episode as well. For now, thank you, Ubin, for joining in with that insightful information on the global aspect of the stories which were making headlines. And do join us on the next episode. And until then, it's Ubin and myself along with the team Channel I saying bye now.
Thank you. Bye.